Hello, my name is Russ Yukon. I'm an Extension Livestock Specialist with Iowa State University. Today we want to talk about some aspects of heifer development, particularly nutrition, pre-calving for those heifers that have been bred and you're going to bring into the herd after having a calf. This is a part of a series on other heifer development topics, and we'd invite you to tune into those videos as well on the Iowa Beef Center YouTube channel. So let's get started on this nutrition section for pre-calving heifers. Obviously, nutrition is important for any beef animal. On these developing heifers, we certainly want them to be able to grow as well as maintain pregnancy. Energy and protein are the main items that we're going to be looking at here. Obviously, there's other nutrients, minerals, and vitamins that are needed, but we're going to be pretty basic and look at energy and protein needs. But certainly, it would encourage you to be analyzing those rations and making sure we're meeting those other requirements. The energy and protein are the main components, the main cost in the diet. When we're looking at how those are used, first they're used for maintenance of the heifer. That maintenance is certainly influenced by stressors, whether that could be weather stress or maybe the heifer is sick, other types of needs, but also the size of the heifer, body type, that can influence maintenance as well. Then, we're looking at the growth of the heifer, and as covered in another section, another video, we're looking to target gains about 1/2 to 1 pound a day on these pregnant developing heifers. And obviously then the pregnancy requires some energy and protein as well, and those requirements really increase in the last third of gestation, and we're going to be looking at that in this particular presentation. Although those requirements are increasing, dry matter intake actually goes down. Let's just kind of see what that relationship is. As that fetus develops in the heifer, takes up extra body space, and they just can't eat enough, particularly on higher forage diets, or eat as much, I should say. This graph shows the percent of feed intake as we move from 240 to 270 days in the blue bars, and that would decrease by approximately 10 to 15%. And then the actual pounds, again, which would be relative to the size of the heifer, going from a little bit above 20 pounds down to just about 20 pounds of dry matter intake per day. So part of the reason this is important is we just need to make sure we've got the amount of nutrients that we need, and they're going to be more concentrated in the ration as that dry matter intake goes down. This shows the energy and how it's used as we proceed through pregnancy. Not much pregnancy requirement early in gestation, but we certainly have maintenance and growth represented by the orange and green bars there. And then as we get toward the latter part of gestation, the last third, those pregnancy requirements, the energy requirements really kick in, and we can see we almost double the amount of energy needed from beginning to end, partly because that heifer's growing and is bigger, but we also have that pregnancy requirement kicking in. And again, the blue line kind of represents the dry matter intake of that heifer. You can see that increases as she's growing, but it does decrease toward that end of pregnancy as she can't consume as much as we covered earlier. This shows similar how protein is being used as they proceed through pregnancy. Again, the maintenance and growth requirements mainly in the first part of the pregnancy, and then pregnancy requirements kick in toward the latter third of pregnancy. And again, you can see they don't double, but they significantly increase as we get there in the last 50, 60 days of pregnancy. This is shown in grams of metabolizable protein, but if we're looking at this, we're probably going from like maybe a 9 to about a 12-13% crude protein ration. Let's look at some actual rations then. These would be rations that we're trying to achieve about 0.95 pounds per day of gain. The heifers going from 875 up to 1,150 pounds over this period of pregnancy. And we've got rations for different stages of pregnancy, as you can see, looking at 60, 155, 230, out to 270 days pregnant as they get closer to calving. These are just some examples of a hay corn ration. Corn would be our energy supplement in this case. The hay would pretty much cover, in fact, probably exceed the protein requirement if it's about 15% crude protein hay. And you can see with those prices, probably a little bit higher than what we are currently here at the beginning of fall in 2014. 375 corn, we certainly lower than that right now, but at times we've been higher. But you can see what those cost of those rations are, and obviously it gets a little more expensive as we add more energy in the ration. These would be rations that we're not looking at any increased weather stress, so they're just normal maintenance for the time of year that we typically have these heifers going through pregnancy, which would be here in Iowa through the winter months. So they're kind of normal winter. And the other thing we should mention, as we're feeding these, if we have more waste, it certainly could influence the amount of feed being required. These really don't have any waste figured in, so we need to allow for that as well. Here's some other example rations, adding corn stalks and distillers grains to the ration in addition to the hay and corn. Again, we can cut back on the hay because we're adding distillers grains, which would add protein and energy to the ration, still keeping some corn in the ration. The corn stalks certainly cheapen up the ration a little bit, and you can see the cost per day are lower as we go through there. Probably have to do a little processing on the corn stalks, and maybe I want to look at this as a total mixed ration as well. But certainly people have been able to feed forage and the concentrate separately, but trying to feed that amount of corn stalks, particularly later in gestation, can be challenging if we're not processing those and delivering them in a total mixed ration. Well, let's just compare for a second here of kind of a first calf heifer that's pregnant to a mature cow that's pregnant, and those energy requirements and what the dry matter intake is. On the left-hand side, you can see the heifer as compared to the mature cow on the right side, and the blue and orange and green bar represent the energy requirements for maintenance, growth, and pregnancy. The heifer, of course, has the growth requirement, where the mature cow wouldn't necessarily have a growth requirement if we're just trying to maintain those, and so again, extra energy required for the heifer. However, dry matter intake, represented in the purple bars, is certainly lower than what that mature cow would be. So again, we need to make sure we concentrate those energy and protein in the ration more for that heifer, developing heifer that's pregnant versus the mature cow, and probably going to have to feed those separately. What does that look like in some actual rations? Again, using the feedstuffs that we had in the previous slide there, the hay, corn, corn stalks, distillers grains. You can see the cow rations, we can utilize more corn stalks in those. Again, we'll probably need to process those to feed that amount of corn stalks. A little less corn and distillers grains in those cow rations, but again, we can put those rations together for both heifers and cows. Just need to make sure that the energy protein's a little bit more concentrated in those heifer rations, particularly as we get up closer to calving and those energy and protein needs of pregnancy increase, as well as having the growth requirement in there for the heifers. Again, you can kind of see those costs. Again, just mainly due to amount of intake. The cow rations can be a little bit more expensive than the heifer rations, but if we add corn stalks in there, we can cheapen those up quite a bit too. And finally, on rations, we just wanted to show one with some corn silage in there. Corn silage, of course, could be a pretty good energy source for cow-calf production, and where we need that energy in a heifer ration, it fits in pretty well. You can see we certainly can lower the amount of corn and corn stalks by utilizing corn silage. Of course, we have the storage and harvesting issues with corn silage that may not fit for some as well, but again, it can be a pretty economical feed for most operations. So we're going to wind up here with this particular ration. Obviously, lots of other feedstuffs that could be used to meet the nutrient requirements for developing heifers. This should give you some examples that you could use. Again, we'd encourage you to work with a nutritionist, your extension beef field specialist, to develop rations for use on your own farm.